Hey, it is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful, empowered harmonizers. We are zooming in and focusing in on a great viewer question, and that is to discuss what does it mean to love yourself, and how does this really impact your experience of life and in a relationship, especially with someone who you might have felt was manipulative, narcissistic, psychopathic, or toxic, and caused a lot of difficulty and perhaps suffering, physical suffering, and emotional suffering, among other forms of suffering as a result of the relationship. So I think that this is really key and crucial, significant to healing. And that is, understanding what self-love means and what it feels like and what it is. Oftentimes, this is a state that is very uncomfortable, foreign, or unknown to someone who has been very closely connected in close proximity or in a relationship with someone who is narcissistic or psychopathic. Oftentimes, they feel as a result of this person's extreme selfishness, they tend to feel that their episodes of narcissistic rage or ego injury, narcissistic injury, then results in them feeling as if they are rejected. And they feel that they have been sort of rejected by this significant other. And especially if it's a family member, a spouse, a family member, a sibling, this can be taken quite literally and to the core, where somebody literally at their core feels a sense of rejection from this person, oftentimes because maybe they're in their own world. Their communication oftentimes is not inclusive. It does not include you. People oftentimes maybe feel talked at or talked to, not talking with this individual. And this experience can result oftentimes in people feeling sort of a low self-esteem, that they are of little or no value, feeling that they in fact then are rejected. In other words, their good deeds, their signs of caring and concern, their willingness to go above and beyond, and oftentimes rescue the narcissist, rescue the psychopath. What does that mean, and how does it really relate to this feeling of rejection? I would say at some time, at some course in a relationship with a narcissist, you might have been endeared to their charm. They might have had a sob story, especially someone who is psychopathic, to get you to let your guard down. But oftentimes there is something that you felt was very endearing or admirable about this individual, which set them apart from many. In other words, it really tugged on your heartstrings. You really rooted for this person. You really cared for this person. And you saw their woes, and there became then a need to sort of rescue them from their narcissism, rescue them from their malignant egotism, sort of rescue them from the pressure that they put on themselves as a narcissist, to, appear as if, to always appear as if, even though there is a different struggle going on, which the narcissist will often allow to go unattended to, unaddressed, not confronted within themselves. So it's just kind of like an undergirding stream or toxic stream that can sort of bubble up and contaminate other, which should be healthy relationships on the surface. So, and then there's always a mystery, where did this come from? This just came out of nowhere. This, was unpredictable. So oftentimes these individuals are in a constant state of fight or flight, the panic stricken, the crisis mode, the, tipping on the tulips through the, broken eggshell garden, where, you're just basically, on high alert. You can't breathe one way or another. It might set them off. You can't look one way or another. It might get them seething and, shaking a fist at you or something worse, and so a feeling that you had to rescue them from their own unhappiness, rescue them from their own vicious cycle, and then also the feeling that unless you participate in some sort of vicious cycle, as an energetic match that you don't really feel that you fit in or belong. And so really, important for those people who find themselves in very, supportive roles, codependent roles, to those who are narcissistic or psychopathic, is sort of the, hollowing out of what's in their best interest in order to adopt a surrogate self, which is like the narcissist. They love them more than themselves because they deny themselves, they sacrifice themselves, they make themselves null and void, because what they then need is the narcissist to be okay. Like so they end up then sort of replacing their needs because, of this crisis. What would then is then becomes like a surrogate need is just if the narcissist is stable, happy, satisfied, they have enough ego, support, enough, being in the center of attention or what have you. More than that though, but just once they're on their egoic streak and they're in that sort of fantasy, sort of hyper aroused mode, and oftentimes this includes manipulating others as part of their need for that power, that sort of power boost, or what gets them sort of in that narcissistic indulgence, feeling that they are at the top of the world, always in the limelight, or always just trying to get away with things, just no matter what it is. They like to push the boundary, the envelope, and oftentimes it can be at the expense of others. In other words, the shock and awe to the other people helps them feel that they are, rewarded. I mean, they even if it's negative attention, it's still attention to them. And so it creates the vicious cycle then begins. And so oftentimes this need to feel that you belong with them, or a sense of, oftentimes is manifest in really rescuing them. Rescuing them from their egoism, rescuing them from their narcissism, rescuing them from the wounds that they have experienced in the past, their trials and tribulations, to sort of be there for them, oftentimes in the way that you would like for them to be to you. But oftentimes that part of the equation doesn't ever get settled. It doesn't ever check out. The checks and balances, just forget that whole side, and it's just like, that never happens. It's the narcissist's promises that never go, follow through. But yet you're always keeping spinning in the air. It's that really just sort of audacious goal that, you want for them and you're willing to support for them, but they're not sort of on that realistic, pragmatic pursuit of it. In other words, they get more of a payoff just from having it as a dream, or what they, put out there for themselves or promulgate for themselves. So they want people to fall in love with the image rather than the real thing. And I think that creates a real rift and a narcissistic injury for those people. In other words, it'll continue to re-injure itself. It's a constant state of feeling unsatisfied. And so oftentimes people who are very sensitive to that want to kind of, they have to either indulge on that level, meaning become an energetic match and be like them in some way, whether it's acting out or eventually it's acting in upon themselves, towards the negative, which oftentimes is a major chapter in the book of discovery and growth from this type of relationship, as it sort of crystallizes and then unfolds and evolves. I mean, it takes a lot of very consistent turns, I would say, within many people. The pattern can be more deeply engraved. For other people, it can be more ongoing for a longer period of time. But there is, I would think, for those who are healthy, who kind of have their feet on the ground, who are sentient beings, who have a heart, who have empathy, who have compassion, and especially love for those people whom they, love, particularly if it's a parent figure, who they look up to. I mean, that's your initial sphere of influence. That's like the core. That is the nucleus. That is the hub. That is where you learn your first, dynamics, your first social dynamics, and who you are and what you do and how you interact, and whether you go, to this and this role, or whether you're sort of deferred to another goal because of another very strong, willed or personality disordered individual in that initial sphere of influence, especially in the family, the immediate family, extended family, or even at the workplace, how, that can be a real family-like environment and include some of this dynamic as well. So people who are sentient, I would say sometimes they feel the wounds, the unspoken wounds or the unspoken hurt of the malignant narcissist, their pathology, their pressure on themselves, their, need to perform. Rather than just sort of live, they have to be a performer. They can't just be, they have to always put on a shtick, and oftentimes it's very endearing, but there is more to the person than meets the eye in that situation. In fact, the narcissist will tend to have resentment oftentimes for people who fall in love with the image, I think because they know it doesn't have a certain sustainability or authenticity, that there's something more that they don't want to really ever talk about, share, discuss, let out of the box, broadcast, share, become intimate or become vulnerable. They just don't find happiness or connection with others with sort of laying it all out on the table. They have a good degree of shame that they are keeping very tightly repressed and pushed down. So I oftentimes I say I would say that the people who surround them oftentimes feel this unspoken angst, even though the narcissist might always have a smile, might always be tap dancing through the tulips, doing high fives to whoever they meet. They just seem that way, but it can be very inauthentic. And so sometimes they resent sometimes the very relationships, and they get who get close to them, who value them on the real, on the lowdown, no matter what. In fact, love the flip side, the heads and the tail of the coin. They just don't want someone who is always perfect all the time. To them, it's too much, too high maintenance. So the narcissist, oftentimes I would say they have a struggle with having a genuine relationship versus someone who's a narcissistic equal, where, in which feels more higher maintenance to them is very interesting, because two narcissists can have that sort of very superficial, but what feels very intense, but never goes anywhere relationship. There needs to be a certain degree of connection beyond just the facade or persona that they have to be always to all people. It's part of their character. And that's why, they will oftentimes find themselves in fields like, acting, in fields like music, in fields like the arts, high C-level executives, business owners, where they sort of are, calling the shots, the show. But it's difficult because even in those business settings, people sense their pressure and they want to kind of be a vent or relieve them, and then feel need to sort of rescue them to let them know that they are loved just the way that they are. So oftentimes people have a real compelling connection with the narcissist, and then when things try to get real, the narcissist ultimately will do the old push off, the old send off, the old alienation, and push away the very people who are good for them. And this is when the devalue and then the discard comes, and then the individual who truly loves them, for better or for worse, sickness and in health, it's not a problem for them. It is for the narcissist though, because they have always this sort of persona that they feel that they always have to put out there. They they feel that they need that it gets them juiced. It makes them feel good. So and then when the individual fails at rescuing them, i.e. the narcissist cannot change, i.e. a psychopath cannot change and will not change, does not feel that they need to change, they are not really a real problem to themselves oftentimes, until oftentimes later, and then they get into that desperation and they realize they aren't all prepared, they don't have all the cattle, they just got the big hat on. They got the big hat, no cattle. They're chewing on the grass, but they don't have anything going on. It's one of those situations where, then the narcissist will then push away individuals who are at the real, who are like a good match for them, who don't need everything to be perfect all the time, who don't need it always to be a sunny day, who aren't threatened by these situations. The narcissist oftentimes feels very threatened or challenged, and they get that fearfulness. And so oftentimes, they want to then jack up and get that ego back up on top of the hill where they feel they should be, and continue to keep that going. For them, I think it would keep that buzz going for them, that lifestyle. This is when, others then find themselves replaced, or betrayed, cheated on, find out that they've got a whole nother second and third personality, different areas of things that they've done that they don't share with you, and yet you've been that open and self-disclosing with them. So it becomes an imbalance of, you're trying to model, that it's okay to be human, and then they're like, no, I got to be this superhuman, and it's not okay. They don't feel that then others will reflect them in their best light. If it's too real, too human, they get very fearful, and then you might say the mask begins to crack. The mask falls off. And then you see a very different person underneath, and it's like, wow, that's like a lot of pressure. So when they are in this mode, oftentimes, people then feel rejected because they can't save the narcissist. They feel ineffectual. They feel defeated, maybe like a failure. And especially depending on the type of relationship, it might be a real game changer for a life, for life. In other words, this relationship is so significant that it alters one's, course or path, life path. It might determine a life path. It might set a life path, very clearly, and close off a lot of other options. In other words, you then are, on a real sort of living on a prayer, just sort of, when you come to healing, you find that there is a holy space within you, a sacred space, oftentimes which the narcissist couldn't respect, couldn't validate with you, couldn't live in, be in, breathe in. They can't make the bed and be there in it. It's just too holy. It's just too balanced for them. It just is, and to them it might feel boring. And because they have this constant need for stimulation, and just sort of to live out that entitlement, I'm above it all, beyond the law, be above and beyond the law, just look at me. They're just, and will continue to put people in shock and awe. I mean, in other words, the drama goes on. If there is no drama, they will create it, engineered, social engineering, engineered chaos, where things are, in a crisis mode. And if the individual sort of kind of does not succeed in rescuing them, oftentimes this becomes a real sort of life failure, and then they start to assign a permanent sense of failure to themselves. Then they equate it with the meaning that they're not lovable, they're not attractive, they won't go anywhere. I will never amount to very much because of this. This is like a big scar, a big wound, like they feel that they are walking around with like a prosthetic, phantom limb that's like the ghost of a relationship. They feel foreign, they feel different than other people. And this, it can cause people a large degree of isolation, going it alone, going it without, self-sacrifice. And then they have, then they get into a very much of a martyr lifestyle, or, but more so it's understanding, how do you get back? How do you get that full juice back? And it's like, it's to accept who you are, just accept, because oftentimes that rejection and then that alienation from the narcissist oftentimes is internalized and then acted out or acted in. In other words, they then maintain that feeling of alienation, of being, rejected. And then they absorb a negative, a negative, sort of a negative insinuation or deep core imprinting that I am a victim. I will never get to the other side. Like, it's very much of a round peg in a round hole, feeling that they are not flexible or adaptable, which is very much usually not true. Usually the people who then come around to the other side are very wise, flexible, and adaptable to a wide variety of situations and circumstances, and have a great attitude, where the narcissist then has a miserable, poor, woe is me, and they can't even see the abundance in front of them. They can't even see how fortunate they are, because they, it's the constant need for new ego. I mean, it's just, so they don't, they're not happy in, I would say that's what, we all have to status quo mode. I mean, what's the problem with that? They don't feel very comfortable being subjected to, if you have to do this, well, I shouldn't have to, just because, in other words, just whatever it is, they feel that they have to be above or beyond the law. I mean, it can be the flip side, the other direction, and they're still, whether it's for this, for that, they're always going to take the flip side. So, what are you going to do? You're going to understand how this feeling of self-sabotage, or that alienation, or that feeling of rejection, how it might course through your day or your being, or where you might always feel it on an ongoing or chronic basis. In other words, peace and harmony, this happened 40 years ago, and I still feel this. Well, it's to understand that at your core, you in your conscious mind have made an interpretation. It doesn't have anything to do with the truth or reality, but your rational mind in that moment had to do what it had to do to survive, and took that course of determination, the fight or flight, which was then, let me rescue, and let me keep going, even if it's to the the deterrent of myself, or the drowning of myself. It's the noble. There becomes this sort of noble loyalty. It's better to save them because they're more worth it than I am. There becomes this, comparison and inequality, which then can cause a sabotaging sense of lifestyle for that other individual on a continual and ongoing basis. In other words, even if they have great accomplishments, they might feel like an imposter. That wasn't really me, that was just luck. Or, they can't really take credit, or where credit is due. They don't have that sort of ownership feeling. So it becomes very important to identify that, and then the cause is criticus effect. And then realize that it is okay to accept yourself, and to accept yourself just as you are, and just continue to make better decisions. But that rejection oftentimes is felt at the core, because oftentimes people have internalized that, of course, all this is my fault, or I wasn't successful in stabilizing this, or I wasn't able, to do, specific things that were able to get them to commit. In other words, I didn't get the relationship to where it should have been. And oftentimes that's your vision, but the narcissist can't fill that other side of the equation. It will not add up. They're not material for that. They're not really cut from that cloth. They're really not made for that type of relationship, which is fine, well, and dandy, and so be it. I mean, that is them. But it's okay to realize that it is okay to be different, and it doesn't mean it's less than, but oftentimes if they're so used to that programming, they've gotten used to saying, well, I'm the this one, I'm the dull one, I'm the this one, and sort of taking that second fiddle constantly. So that becomes, a very negative emotional habit of sort of, deferring oneself, always, and that can be very painful until someone says, I can't be this anymore, no matter what, this is going to hinder me. So you have to have a change of attitude. And it's really like an attitude of gratitude and sort of being okay with what you have. And that is where you instead of always looking for the next, it's like, where is it at right now? And then how can you amplify and enrich that, and feel liberated and free without feeling a sense of rejection or sort of accepting some sort of blame for something that was beyond your control and beyond what you can do. I mean, you are a hero. Just know that in your heart and remember that. This is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today, and I hope that these videos do help. Please share, please subscribe, and please donate for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support. It is about remembering and accepting the goodness of who you are. And it's not taking that rejection and interpreting that as, I'm a failure, I'm unlovable, I am not good enough. And caving into that sort of external locus of control, being able to, bring it down to size and sort of minimize it, and accepting that that is okay, that you don't have to constantly prove and justify. I mean, it becomes a real stressor. So detach from that need and see if you can have a little bit more sort of strength, and things will start to sort of come to you, and you'll be on the healing growth moving forward and feeling stronger, and you will be able to look back in the rearview mirror and say, wow, that relationship really, I do understand it better now. I have perspective. Once you accept yourself, not as the reject, not as the one who couldn't save or make the change, but as really mighty as who you are, actually, from coming through, is amazing and a miracle in and of itself. And I applaud you. Amen. Have a beautiful day. Take care.